Formula 1 chiefs will discuss with teams later this week the idea of a significant change to the 2026 engine rules aimed at heading off fears about cars repeatedly running out of energy on the straights. Ahead of the all-new turbo hybrid regulations that are coming for next year, a radical proposal has been added to the agenda for the next F1 Commission meeting that takes place in Geneva on Thursday. The idea to be debated by teams and senior figures from FOM and the FIA is for F1 to move away in part from a much heralded aspect of the new rules that are on the horizon. This was for a 50-50 power ratio split between the internal combustion engine and battery elements of the new power units, where 350 kilowatts comes from both elements. While the originally intended 50-50 split will remain for qualifying, the suggestion being looked at is to step back from letting teams run the full 350 kilowatts from the batteries in the races themselves. If the plan goes ahead, the maximum allowed would be just 200 kilowatts, which will shift the power ratio from 50-50 ICE battery to 64-36. The hope is that by reducing the maximum power that can be deployed, it will allow the battery to be used for an extended period around the lap, therefore minimising the chances of drivers being left with no extra energy at all. But why has F1 ended up in such a scenario just 9 months out from the 2026 cars hitting the track for the first time? When F1 elected to rip up the rulebook for 26 and do something different, it was heavily motivated by the desire to get more manufacturers involved in F1. The main target was obviously the Volkswagen Group, with both its Audi and Porsche brands potentially ready to join Grand Prix racing if the rules were attractive enough. There were 3 key elements that were viewed as critical to get them in. The first was the move to fully sustainable fuels, which is seen as a critical step in F1's transition to become net carbon neutral. The second was getting rid of the energy harvesting that we currently have from the MGUH, which converted excess heat from the engine into battery power. This device was deemed to be too complicated, too expensive, and not road relevant enough. The third element required was an increase in electrification, with F1 eventually deciding to make a major step from the 120 kilowatts that is available now from battery power all the way up to 350 kilowatts. This means that batteries will contribute as much as the internal combustion engine itself to the overall power figure, which is what has triggered the 50-50 concept. Even though Porsche's plans to enter F1 fell by the wayside after it could not agree a deal with Red Bull, the planned 26 rules did their job in attracting Audi in, and they also convinced Honda to rethink its planned exit. However, the rules were widely viewed as being a bit of a compromise because, as manufacturers began working on the all-new power units, they quickly realised that things would not be perfect with the way things have been shaped. A combination of losing the MGUH to harvest energy, as well as an increased allowance in deploying battery power, meant the engines were going to end up being energy starved. In simple terms, this means there's not enough power harvested to allow as much deployment around a lap as teams would like. While that may not be a huge headache at venues without long straights, for some power-sensitive tracks like Monza, there have been worries that cars could run out of energy halfway down the straight, triggering a poor spectacle and huge frustrations for drivers. Max Verstappen famously revealed that, from an early simulator run he'd done, he ended up having to change down gear on the Monza straight after the car had run out of battery power entirely. Some of the early fears were, however, triggered by teams running in simulators of cars that had a lot more drag than the designs will get next year. Active aero has become a core part of the cars for 26, where wings will go into low drag mode down the straights to help minimise the energy that's required to propel them at speed. Furthermore, 2 additional demands have been put in the regulations to ensure that drivers are not suddenly left with zero power halfway down the straights. The first relates to car speed and demands that once the cars are up to a certain velocity, then the limit of electrical energy that can be used starts dropping away from the peak 350 kilowatts allowed with the 26 power units. As can be seen here, this starts reducing as cars approach 300 km an hour, then tapers off more aggressively than 340 km an hour before it hits zero at about 345 km an hour. Perhaps of more importance though is an article in the technical regulations that limits the rate at which power can be reduced, so there's no cliff edge potential. This is known as the turn down ramp rate and effectively prevents teams from burning all the power quickly to arrive at a point where drivers instantly go from having maximum power to none at all. There are 2 ramp rates laid down, one for tracks where power will be very limited and then a different metric for everywhere else. At those tracks where the FIA determines that the power limited distance exceeds 3,500 metres, then the power can be reduced at no greater rate than 50 kilowatts in any 1 second period. For any other venue, the rate of reduction is capped at 100 kilowatts in any 1 second period. At Monza, which will fall into the power limited track category, it will take 7 seconds for the battery to go from 350 kilowatts to zero. If we do some calculations, the start-finish straight there is approximately 15 seconds long. So if there was in theory enough energy to run for half that straight at max power, say 7.5 seconds, without any restrictions, then things are different with a ramp down limit. It will mean teams can run around 4 seconds at 350 kilowatts, followed by 7 seconds of ramp down. This means 11 seconds of energy in total, which is now 3/4 of the straight, it's a scenario very different from those earlier fears. Combined together, these extra rules force teams to focus on efficiency of the battery power rather than efficiency of lap time, and it will prevent them from doing what they would have done without any restrictions, which is deploying the full 350 kilowatts at the start of the straight until the batteries are empty. While some manufacturers are confident that all the above measures should be enough to make the situation acceptable, not everyone is convinced. And as the rules edge closer, there's been some lobbying to try to help improve things and stop F1 turning into an economy run. The FIA has taken on board these concerns because it's determined to ensure that 26 does not become a letdown. With the key challenge for the new turbo hybrid regulations being the electrical element that revolves around the battery, one of its conclusions is that the best way to better manage things is to limit the amount of energy that can be deployed. So rather than permit the maximum of 350 kilowatts that's allowed in the regulations, one idea that's being tabled is to cut it back in races where things will be more challenging. While the full power will still be available for qualifying, the proposal is that battery power deployment be reduced from the current 350 kilowatts down to 200 kilowatts for the sprints and Grand Prix themselves. This will shift the power ratio from 50-50 to 64-36. Drivers will also be allowed to use the full 350 kilowatts for what's known as the override system, which is an extra boost of energy that can be used at selected points to help with overtaking. The idea behind the shift to 200 kilowatts in the races is that, with less power being deployed, what energy the battery has stored can be unleashed over a much greater distance of the lap, and especially for a longer time down the straights. While the reduction in power, which is equivalent to 200 horsepower, will have an impact in holding back acceleration immediately out of a corner, sources have indicated that the performance profile around a lap will be more consistent as cars are running less of the lap without any battery power at all. One of the other added benefits of the change is that with the override overtake element remaining at 350 kilowatts, then it should further open up overtaking opportunities, as there will be a bigger offset between cars that have it and those that do not. The idea of pulling the battery power back to 200 kilowatts for races is not without controversy, with opinions in the paddock very much divided. Red Bull's Christian Horner, whose team is working on its own power unit for the first time next year, thinks it will help avoid the worst of drivers being on economy runs. He's spoken many times about worries of drivers needing to change down gears on the straights because they've run out of power too early. But not everyone's in favour, and one of the most vocal against is Mercedes boss Toto Wolff, whose team has invested heavily in the new power units and is rumoured to have nailed the new regulations, so could be the one to beat if things stay the same. In some comments that grabbed attention after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix regarding the rule change having been put on the agenda of the F1 Commission meeting, he said it was almost as hilarious as reading some of the comments that I see on Twitter on American politics. I really want to protect ourselves and make no comment, but it's a joke. For the change to go through for 26, it will require support from the majority of manufacturers, something that may well fall short of being achieved unless there are some other compromises thrown onto the table. What is certain is that there's going to be some heated debate about it, and with plenty of months to go before 26 engines hit the track for the first time, there's going to be some major efforts made to try to get the compromised regulations into the best shape possible, and the true hope is that F1 does not deliver a damp squib next year.